January 12th, 1945, 9:47 a.m., deep inside a reinforced bunker 40 feet beneath the Emperor's Palace in Tokyo, 6 men were seated around a mahogany table, a table that had borne witness to countless strategic decisions. But the document that Admiral Marcus Ugaki placed before them this morning would render all previous calculations meaningless. The room was silent, save for the ventilation system, pulling air through filters designed to guard against gas attacks. Attacks that would never come. Prime Minister Ken Koiso picked up the intelligence report with hands that had signed declarations of war, peace treaties, and execution orders. His fingers trembled as he read the title stamped in red ink across the top: Urgent Threat Assessment, P-51 Mustang Fighter, Extended Range Capability. What he absorbed in the next 47 seconds would shatter his understanding of the war. More than 3 years of combat had. The first page contained a single photograph: an American P-51 Mustang fighter, serial number 44-13926, photographed by a Japanese observation post on Iwo Jima at 11:23 a.m. on January 7th. The aircraft was 1,247 miles from its base at Saipan, and it was turning around to go home. Koiso looked up at Admiral Ugaki. The naval intelligence chief had flown 127 combat missions before his appointment to the Joint Chiefs. He was not a man given to exaggeration or panic. That made his next words even more devastating. The P-51 Mustang can now escort B-29 bombers directly over Tokyo. Our calculations confirm a maximum combat radius of 1,750 miles. With external fuel tanks. There is no location in the Japanese home islands beyond their operational range. Our air defenses are now worthless. General James Umezu set down his teacup so hard it cracked against the saucer. The Army Chief of Staff had built Japan's defensive doctrine. On a simple principle: American fighters had limited range. Force them to fly without escorts. Pick off the bombers, one by one. The strategy had worked against the British in Burma. It had worked against the Chinese. It should have worked against the Americans. But the Americans had just rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. Navy Minister Michael Yonai turned to page 3 of the report. The technical specifications read like a nightmare, written by an engineer. Maximum speed, 437 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 41,900 feet. 650 caliber machine guns, with 1,880 rounds total ammunition. But the number that made his hands shake was simpler. Range with 2 110-gallon drop tanks. 1,650 miles. He had commanded the combined fleet when Japan still had a navy worth the name. He understood what those numbers meant, better than anyone else in the room. "Gentlemen," Yonai said quietly, "if enemy fighters can reach Tokyo from Saipan and return safely, we have no sanctuary. Our training bases are exposed. Our industrial centers are vulnerable. Our strategic reserves have vanished." But War Minister Kyle Anami was not ready to accept the mathematics. He pulled out a map of the Pacific and began measuring distances with calipers that had belonged to his grandfather, a naval officer who had served in the Russo-Japanese War. "Saipan to Tokyo," he announced, "is 1,456 miles. If they can fly 1,650 miles, that gives them," he paused to calculate, 194 miles of combat radius over our capital. Nearly 30 minutes of combat time before they must return. 30 minutes, Admiral Ugaki confirmed. 30 minutes during which our interceptors must engage them. 30 minutes during which they will protect American bombers with overwhelming firepower. And 30 minutes during which any pilot we send up will face odds we cannot overcome. Prime Minister Koiso set down the report and looked at each member of the Joint Chiefs in turn. These were the men who controlled the fate of 72 million Japanese citizens. These were the strategists who had planned the conquest of Asia. These were the military minds that had coordinated simultaneous attacks across 4,000 miles of ocean, and they had just learned that a single American fighter design had made their entire defensive strategy worthless. But how did this happen? Foreign Minister Martin Shigemitsu leaned forward, his prosthetic arm resting on the table, where a bomb planted by a Chinese nationalist had taken the real one in 1932. We knew about the Mustang. Our intelligence reported its development in 1943. How did they extend its range by? He checked the numbers. 600 miles. In less than 2 years, Admiral Ugaki slid another document across the table. This one had been compiled from interrogations of downed American pilots, analysis of crashed aircraft, and reports from agents in neutral countries who monitored American aviation journals. Drop tanks, Ugaki explained, detachable external fuel tanks that extend range without compromising performance. The Americans refined the design throughout 1944, first 75-gallon tanks, then 108-gallon versions. Now these 110-gallon tanks that give the Mustang range, we cannot match or counter. He pulled out technical diagrams captured from a downed P-51 near Iwo Jima. The drop tank design revealed an engineering sophistication that shocked the Japanese engineers who had examined it. The tanks are pressurized to maintain fuel flow at high altitude. They incorporate anti-slosh baffles to prevent destabilization during combat maneuvers. The release mechanism can jettison both tanks in under 2 seconds if the pilot needs to fight unencumbered, and the Americans are producing these tanks at a rate of 12,000 units per month from a single factory in Buffalo, New York. Navy Minister Yonai studied the diagrams with the eye of someone who understood industrial production. Our factories struggle to produce 200 drop tanks monthly, and ours leak at altitude, and ours cannot be jettisoned reliably, and ours add drag that reduces performance. The Americans, Ugaki continued, solved metallurgy problems. We have not. They developed sealants that maintain integrity at 40,000 feet and minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They created standardized fittings that allow any tank to mount on any P-51 without modification. They built a supply chain that delivers these tanks to forward airfields faster than we can destroy them. General Umezu shook his head slowly. In China, our pilots flew Zeros with drop tanks. This is not new technology. Why couldn't we? He stopped mid-sentence as he realized the answer to his own question. Because, Admiral Yonai finished for him, our industry cannot produce them in sufficient quantities because our pilots lack the training to use them effectively in combat, because our aircraft designers prioritized maneuverability over range, and because the Americans have industrial capacity, we cannot hope to equal. The silence that followed lasted 23 seconds. In that silence, 5 decades of Japanese military doctrine died. Prime Minister Ken Koiso rose and walked over to the wall map, a map that depicted the shrinking perimeter of Japan's defensive sphere. 6 months earlier, that perimeter had encompassed the Philippines, Formosa, and countless island chains. Now it had contracted to the home islands themselves. And if the Americans could position long-range fighters over Tokyo, even that final perimeter was just an illusion. He turned back to face the Joint Chiefs and uttered the words that would be recorded in classified minutes, remaining classified until 1978. If these fighters can reach Tokyo, the war is already lost. War Minister Kyle Anami stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the concrete floor. We have 5,000 fighters for homeland defense. We have 2 million troops. We have prepared positions in every city. You cannot, he struggled for words, you cannot declare defeat because the Americans have extended the range of a single fighter design. Foreign Minister Martin Shigemitsu's response was quiet, but it cut through Anami's protests like a knife. Can those 5,000 fighters operate without fuel? Can those 2 million troops fight without supplies? Can those defensive positions matter if our production centers are destroyed with impunity? He produced his own set of calculations, neatly arranged in columns on rice paper. The B-29 Superfortress carries 10,000 pounds of bombs. With fighter escort, an American formation can include 500 bombers. That is 5 million pounds of explosives on a single target. Our intelligence estimates America can sustain such raids daily. Our industrial capacity cannot survive that rate of destruction. Admiral Marcus Ugaki added the naval perspective, which only darkened the strategic picture further. Without air superiority, our surface fleet cannot operate. Without secure shipping lanes, we cannot supply our troops in Korea, Manchuria, or China. Without control of our own airspace, we cannot defend our training centers, which means we cannot replace pilot losses. The P-51's range does not just threaten Tokyo, it threatens the entire structure that allows us to continue fighting. Navy Minister Michael Yonai returned to the technical specifications because numbers did not lie or offer false hope. The report states the P-51D climbs to 20,000 feet in 7.3 minutes. Our Ki-84 Hayate, our best interceptor, requires 9.2 minutes. The Americans will have altitude advantage. The report states the P-51D has a maximum speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Our Hayate reaches 427 miles per hour. The Americans will have speed advantage. The report states the P-51D mounts 6 50 caliber machine guns with 400 rounds per gun. Our Hayate mounts 2 20mm cannons and 2 12.7mm machine guns. With limited ammunition, the Americans will have firepower advantage. He set down the report, with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. And now, we learn they have range advantage as well. Tell me, War Minister, what advantage do our pilots retain? General James Umezu provided the answer. None of them wanted to hear. Willingness to die. That is all we have left. Kamikaze tactics, special attack units, pilots who will deliberately crash into American formations. But even that, he admitted, requires getting close enough to the enemy to make such sacrifice meaningful. Foreign Minister Martin Shigemitsu pulled out another document from his leather briefcase. This one bore the seal of the Soviet embassy in Tokyo. Our ambassador in Moscow reports increasing Soviet troop movements toward Manchuria. If Stalin believes Japan is losing, he will void our neutrality pact and attack from the north. The Americans approach from the south and east. The Soviets will come from the north and west, and we will have no air force capable of defending either front because our fighters lack the range, speed, and firepower to survive against the P-51 Mustang. Prime Minister Ken Koiso returned to his seat at the head of the table. At 62 years old, he had served in the Russo-Japanese War, administered Korea, and led armies in China. He had believed in Japan's destiny to lead Asia. He had trusted in Japanese spirit to overcome American material advantages, but spirit could not extend. The range of an aircraft, Spirit could not produce 110-gallon drop tanks by the thousands. Spirit could not change the mathematics that condemned Japan to a war it could no longer win. Admiral Marcus Ugaki was not finished with his intelligence briefing. He turned to a page marked with red tabs. The report includes interrogation transcripts from Captain James Tanner, shot down over Iwo Jima on January 9th. He states that America is currently producing 450 P-51 Mustangs per month. That is 5,400 aircraft per year. Our entire fighter production for 1944 was 2,572 aircraft of all types. Foreign Minister Martin Shigemitsu pulled out an economic analysis prepared by the Finance Ministry. The Americans produce one P-51 Mustang for approximately $51,000 in American currency. That includes the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the 6 machine guns, the radio equipment, and all instrumentation. Their production time, from raw materials to flight-ready aircraft, is 9,400. Man-hours at the North American Aviation Plant in Inglewood, California. He set down one report and picked up another. Our Ki-84 Hayate costs 187,000 yen to produce. At current exchange rates, approximately $44,000 in American currency. But our production time is 6,800 man-hours due to less efficient manufacturing processes. We produce an inferior aircraft at a similar cost, but require 78% more labor and twice as much time, and we can only build 3,500 of them annually. Compared to America's 5,400 P-51s, Navy Minister Michael Yonai understood the strategic implications immediately. They are outproducing us in quantity while maintaining superior quality. This is the definition of industrial dominance. But Admiral Marcus Ugaki had more devastating numbers to share. The Americans are not just producing fighters. According to Lieutenant Williams' interrogation, the United States manufactured 96,218 aircraft in 1944, all types, fighters, bombers, transports, trainers. Japan produced 2,880 aircraft total. America built 3. 4 times more aircraft than we did, while also building the world's largest navy, equipping Soviet forces through Lend-Lease, supplying British Commonwealth forces, and maintaining the highest civilian standard of living on Earth. He let those numbers settle before continuing. Captain Tanner also states that American pilot training now takes 400 hours before combat deployment. Our pilots receive 90 hours, if they're fortunate. He states that American Mustang squadrons average 97%. Maintenance readiness, our units struggled to maintain 40% operational aircraft. Admiral Marcus Ugaki turned to another interrogation transcript, this one from Lieutenant Robert Williams, shot down over Luzon in December. Lieutenant Williams detailed his training regimen. He spent 6 months at primary flight school in Texas, 4 months at advanced combat school in Arizona, 3 months in P-51 transition training in California, then 2 months of tactical formation flying in Hawaii before his first combat mission. Total training time, 415 hours of flight time, plus 200 hours of classroom instruction. Admiral Marcus Ugaki looked up from the transcript. Our accelerated program gives new pilots just 40 hours of basic flight training, 30 hours of fighter tactics, and maybe, just maybe, 20 hours of gunnery practice, if they're lucky enough to have fuel. We are sending teenagers, kids with a measly 90 hours total experience, against American pilots with over 400 hours of training. This isn't combat, this is execution. Foreign Minister Martin Shigemitsu added the diplomatic intelligence that only worsened the training gap. Our embassy in Sweden reports that America has 27 flight training schools operating simultaneously. They graduate 2,500 new pilots monthly. They have a backlog of qualified pilots waiting for aircraft assignments. Meanwhile, our training command reports we lost 12 instructors last month alone to combat reassignments. We are consuming our ability to train the next generation, even as we lose the current one. War Minister Koiso tried one more time, to find a strategic option that didn't end in complete surrender or total annihilation. We have prepared for Ketsugo, Operation Decisive. Every civilian will fight. Every city will resist. The Americans will pay such a price for invading our home islands that they will agree to a negotiated peace rather than total conquest. Navy Minister Michael Yonai's response was delivered with the weariness of a man who had watched a navy die and now watched the final illusions die with it. Ketsugo assumes the Americans must invade, but if P-51 Mustangs can escort bombers over Tokyo daily, why would America sacrifice hundreds of thousands of soldiers in an invasion? They can simply destroy our industrial capacity, our transportation networks, our food distribution, our fuel production. They can reduce Japan to starvation and darkness without losing a single soldier to our prepared defenses. The strategic logic was inescapable. The P-51's range had not just changed the tactical situation, it had eliminated Japan's final gambit. Foreign Minister Martin Shigemitsu set his pen down carefully and spoke with the precision of a diplomat who had negotiated with Nazis and fascists and knew exactly how power dynamics shifted when military reality changed. Gentlemen, I have served in diplomatic posts in China, Britain, and the Soviet Union. I understand how nations calculate when to continue fighting and when to seek terms. The moment American fighters appear over Tokyo with impunity, every neutral nation will know the war is over. Our allies will abandon us. Our occupied territories will rebel. Our own citizens will lose faith in victory. He pulled out a telegram from the Japanese ambassador in Switzerland, dated January 10th. Swedish diplomats inform us that American newspapers are already publishing articles about the extended range of the P-51. They call it the fighter that sealed Japan's fate. European observers are placing bets on when, not if, Japan surrenders. The world is watching our air defenses collapse. In real time, Prime Minister Koiso stood again and walked to the ventilation grate where filtered air entered the bunker, somewhere above him. Tokyo continued its daily life. Factories produced weapons. Schools trained students in bamboo spear tactics. Newspapers printed stories of inevitable victory. None of them knew that 40 feet below the Emperor's palace, their leaders had just acknowledged the mathematical certainty of defeat. He turned back to the Joint Chiefs and asked the question that would define the next 7 months. Do we surrender now, while we still have something to negotiate with? Or do we fight until the Americans reduce our cities to ash and our people to starvation? The debate that followed would last until August, when 2 atomic bombs and a Soviet invasion provided the final answer. But in that bunker on January 12, 1945, at 10:34 a.m., the Joint Chiefs had already learned the truth. The P-51 Mustang had won the war. Everything that followed was just accounting for the inevitable. Admiral Ugaki provided the final technical assessment that removed any remaining doubt. Our pilots report that the P-51's maximum dive speed exceeds 500 miles per hour. Our fighters experience structural failure above 450 miles per hour. In combat, this means American pilots can always disengage if the fight turns against them. They can dive away faster than we can pursue. They retain the tactical initiative in every engagement, Admiral Marcus Ugaki opened a folder marked with red classification stamps and pulled out combat action reports filed by Japanese squadron commanders over the past 3 months. December 18, 1944, Philippines Sea. Commander Takahashi reports encountering 16 P-51 Mustangs escorting a B-29 formation. Quote, "We attacked with 24 Zeros at 26,000 feet. Americans climbed above us. We pursued to 32,000 feet, where our engines lost power. Americans dove through our formation at speeds we could not match. 8 of our aircraft destroyed in 4 minutes. 0 American losses." End quote. He turned to the next report. December 27, 1944, East China Sea. Lieutenant Sato reports intercepting a P-51 formation returning from an escort mission. Quote, "We had altitude advantage, attacking from 29,000 feet against targets at 24,000 feet. Americans did not attempt to evade. They climbed directly toward us at a rate we could not match. Combat turned into a head-on gun duel. Their 650 caliber guns against our 2 20mm cannons. We scored hits, but aircraft absorbed damage without critical failures. Their return fire was devastating. 5 of our 9 aircraft shot down. The remaining 4 broke off engagement. American formation continued home without deviation." End quote. Navy Minister Michael Yonai recognized the signature tactical pattern. They are not running from fights. They are controlling the engagement parameters. They choose when to fight and when to disengage, based on tactical advantage, not fear or fuel concerns. General James Umezu added a report from his own Army Air Force units, January 3, 1945, Formosa Strait. Major Nakamura attempted to intercept P-51s, providing close air support to an American naval task force. Quote, "Engaged at 18,000 feet, Americans dropped external fuel tanks and turned into our attack. Rate of turn, superior to intelligence estimates. Sustained G-forces we cannot match without blackout. Gun platform stability during high-speed maneuvers beyond our training experience. Combat lasted 11 minutes. We lost 14 aircraft. Americans lost none." End quote. Admiral Marcus Ugaki closed the intelligence file and delivered the conclusion his analysis supported. "We're asking our pilots to fight an enemy. That's faster in level flight, faster in a dive, more heavily armed, better armored, longer ranged, and produced in quantities we cannot match. This isn't a question of training or spirit. This is mathematics. And mathematics does not care about courage." General James Umezu, the Army Chief of Staff, who had built his career on belief in Japanese military superiority, finally acknowledged what the numbers proved. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long until American P-51s appear over Tokyo in force?" Admiral Marcus Ugaki consulted his intelligence timeline. "Our agents in Saipan report that American construction crews are extending runways to accommodate additional fighter squadrons." He paused. "We estimate 2 weeks before the 7th Fighter Command achieves full operational capability. 3 weeks before the first large-scale escort mission over our capital." 3 weeks," Prime Minister Ken Koiso repeated, his voice heavy. 3 weeks until the Japanese people see American fighters flying over the Emperor's palace." He sighed. 3 weeks until our propaganda about inevitable victory becomes an obvious lie." War Minister Kyle Anami made one final attempt to find a military solution. "We could evacuate our industrial centers," he suggested. "Disperse production into underground facilities. Move critical manufacturing to Manchuria and Korea, where American fighters cannot reach." Foreign Minister Martin Shigemitsu crushed that hope with cold logic. "Such evacuation would take 6 months. We do not have," he stated flatly, would require transportation capacity, already destroyed by American submarines, would need resources we cannot spare, and would signal to our own people that we expect to lose control of our airspace. The psychological impact would be catastrophic. The meeting continued for another 73 minutes, but the conclusion never changed. The Joint Chiefs adjourned at 12:47 p.m., with orders to prepare contingency plans for both continued resistance and potential peace negotiations. The classified minutes recorded Prime Minister Koiso's closing statement. The P-51 Mustang represents more than a technical achievement, he declared. It represents an industrial and organizational capacity that Japan cannot equal. He paused. We are not losing this war because of lack of courage or deficiency of spirit. We are losing because America can design, produce, and deploy weapon systems faster than we can counter them. This is a lesson our nation must learn, regardless of how bitter the teaching. 3 weeks later, on February 3, 1945, at 2:17 p.m., the first formation of P-51 Mustangs appeared over Tokyo at 28,000 feet. They escorted 84 B-29 Superfortress bombers that dropped 1,246 tons of incendiary bombs on aircraft manufacturing centers. The Japanese defense plan had called for 300 interceptors to launch in waves, overwhelming the American escort through numerical superiority. But fuel shortages meant only 147 fighters could be fueled for the mission. Maintenance issues grounded another 38 aircraft. Weather scattered the formations. Only 89 Japanese fighters actually engaged the American formation. The combat lasted 47 minutes. American P-51s operated in pairs, using coordinated tactics perfected over 2 years of European combat. Japanese pilots, many with less than 100 hours of flight time, attacked individually, according to samurai tradition that emphasized personal courage over tactical coordination. The 78th Fighter Squadron, flying P-51Ds from Iwo Jima, encountered the heaviest resistance. Captain William Shomo led a 4-aircraft element that engaged 16 Japanese fighters attempting to reach the bomber stream. His after-action report was filed at 7:32 p.m. that evening. Quote, engaged mixed formation of Ki-84 Hayate and Ki-43 Oscar fighters at 27,000 feet. Enemy attempted diving attacks on bomber formation. We intercepted at 350 miles per hour indicated airspeed. Enemy fighters faster than intelligence predicted, but still 40 miles per hour, slower than P-51D at combat power. Engaged for 14 minutes. Expended 1,247 rounds. 50 caliber ammunition. Confirmed 7 enemy aircraft destroyed. My wingman Lieutenant Morrison confirmed 4 destroyed. Element total: 11 enemy aircraft destroyed, 0 friendly losses, 0 battle damage to P-51s. Returned to base with 45 minutes fuel remaining. End quote. Across the Tokyo engagement zone, the pattern repeated. American pilots with hundreds of hours of training and aircraft with superior performance in every measurable category faced Japanese pilots with minimal experience, flying inferior aircraft. The outcome was mathematically predetermined. Japanese interceptors managed to shoot down 3 bombers. The Americans shot down 37 Japanese fighters without losing a single P-51. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura, one of the few Japanese pilots to survive the engagement, filed a combat report that was discovered in archives in 1963. Quote, we climbed to intercept at full power, reached 24,000 feet as American fighters dove through our formation. I fired at P-51 from 200 meters. Observed strikes on fuselage and wing. Enemy aircraft did not deviate from flight path. My bullets had no effect. Enemy wingman turned onto my tail in less than 3 seconds. I attempted to evade, but American pilot matched every maneuver. I heard impacts. Oil pressure dropped. Engine temperature rose. I dove for cloud cover and survived only because American pilot chose to return to escort duty rather than pursue a damaged aircraft. I landed at Atsugi with 47 bullet holes in my Ki-84. The American pilot could have killed me at any time. He chose not to because I was no longer a threat. This is the difference between their air force and ours." End quote. The prophecy delivered in that bunker meeting had come true. The mathematics had been correct, and Japan's war was already over, even as 7 more months of fighting claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The P-51 Mustang did not win the Pacific War alone, but on January 12, 1945, in a bunker beneath the Emperor's palace, 6 men looked at intelligence reports and understood that a single fighter design, with a 1,650-mile range, had made their nation's defeat inevitable. Everything else was just timing. In 1952, former Prime Minister Koiso testified at war crimes tribunals. Prosecutors asked when he first believed Japan would lose the war. His answer was recorded in tribunal transcripts. January 12, 1945. "The morning I learned that American fighters could reach Tokyo," he stated somberly. "I knew in that moment that our strategy was obsolete, our defenses were inadequate, and our hopes were illusions. The P-51 Mustang did not just threaten our capital. It destroyed our last rational basis for continuing the fight." The classified War Council minutes were declassified in 1978 as part of diplomatic normalization between Japan and the United States. Historians found a handwritten note in the margins, written by Admiral Ugaki next to his intelligence assessment. "We built our strategy on the assumption that physics would protect us, that distance would preserve us, that the ocean would shield us. The Americans conquered physics with engineering. They defeated distance with innovation. They crossed the ocean with a capability we simply could not match. This is how wars are truly won." Today, the P-51 Mustang is remembered as one of the finest fighter aircraft of World War II. Aviation museums proudly display restored examples. Air shows feature the distinctive sound of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that powered the American variants. But in military academies across the world, the P-51 represents something far more profound. It is taught as a case study in how a single weapon system, with the right capabilities, can render an entire enemy strategy meaningless. How range and endurance can be more decisive than sheer firepower. How industrial capacity ultimately determines military outcomes. The bunker beneath the Emperor's palace, where the Joint Chiefs met on January 12, 1945, was sealed after the war. The mahogany table was destroyed, the ventilation system was dismantled, the classified documents were archived in temperature-controlled vaults, but the lesson remained. The lesson that changed how nations think about strategic defense and the weapons that can overcome any fixed fortification. Sometimes, winning does not require destroying the enemy's forces. Sometimes, winning requires making the enemy's entire strategic concept impossible to execute. The P-51 Mustang, with its 1,650-mile range and its 110-gallon drop tanks, did exactly that. And on a cold January morning in 1945, 6 men in a bunker realized that mathematics had already decided their fate. What do you think would have happened if Japan had developed long-range fighters first, or if American engineers had failed to perfect drop tank technology? The comments section is where strategic discussions happen. Share your analysis of this turning point in military history, and if you found this deep dive into the moment Japan's leadership knew the war was lost valuable. Consider supporting the channel with super thanks. Your support helps fund the archival research that brings these classified Joint Chiefs minutes to light. Because understanding how wars are truly won requires more than studying battles. It requires examining the moments when leaders realize that technology has made their strategies worthless. The P-51 Mustang created one of those moments, and that moment changed the course of history.